This film is about how a unitary authority from a small island off the south coast of England attempted to lead us to a sustainable promised land and failed. That attempt began in this building. As you can see from the condition of the building, the Isle of Wight Council does civic pride like nobody else. But perhaps that's hardly surprising, given that there has been a 40% staff reduction in response to government cuts in financial support. This is due to austerity, and as we're all in it together, we'll all feel a lot better eventually. In October 2007, Transition Island was launched by local chiropractor Vav Simon, attracting over 60 people to a meeting here at the Riverside Centre in Newport.
Everybody seemed quite buzzy because it was something new, it was something different, and there were results coming from it. We went out on what we call road trips, so we went round all the main communities on the island. We didn't get a huge response. We had a lot of enthusiasm, and the people who came were very interested, but the attitude overwhelmingly was, yes, this is really good. If you do it and tell us what to do, then we'll do it.
It was obvious that there was an enthusiasm for sustainability here that couldn't be stifled by commercial interest or political expediency.
I just know that to try and get somebody to stand up and be a leader within their community was very difficult.
The then Chief Executive Officer of the Isle of Wight Council, Joe Duckworth, set out his vision for a green, sustainable island. He gave an interview to the Guardian newspaper. It appeared on November the 2nd, 2007. We are very well positioned to be the greenest island in Europe. I really sense that this is the way forward. It will happen. The idea is to create wealth and reduce our carbon footprint. We could be a major exporter of green energy from tidal power alone. The technology is there, the finance is there, and everyone is very keen. Without, it would appear, consulting many councillors or indeed council officers, Joe Duckworth launched EcoIsland.
I was amazed. I was astounded. It all came completely out of the blue. We in the council had not had any suggestion that Joe Duckworth was going to make an announcement like this, and I certainly hadn't. No reason necessarily why I should. I wasn't working in a strategic role at that time, but then I was in charge of a lot of green and growing stuff that the council did, so had it been a strategy that had been worked out in any detail by officers of the council, there's a pretty good chance I would have been involved in it.
I think it's fair to say there had been quite a bit of discussion about the concept of EcoIsland prior to that announcement. We as a council had to develop what's called a sustainable community strategy, and we felt this was the ideal theme for it, and we thought the island lent itself naturally to this.
Perhaps the detail hadn't been thought through particularly, but the top line ideas were good and exciting. And for a newspaper editor who's always accused of putting negative stories in the county press all the time, it's nice to have some exciting positive news sometimes.
It came as a great surprise to everybody, I think, including officers at the council and members of the Isle of Wight Council, when in the Guardian newspaper there was this great big article saying that the Isle of Wight was going to become the eco-island with all these ideas of using methane from cows and recycling and renewable energy. And having that sort of suddenly appear meant that the council then had to make a decision, I guess, were they going to go for eco-island, or was it just going to be an idea that the chief exec had?
I suppose there was a bit of initial rhetoric without necessarily the potential at that stage to follow through, and that was reflected in what then followed. So I think in hindsight we could have done with some more substance up front before our chief executive made that unilateralist announcement.
It was an idea that came to him, and he just wanted to get it out there because in his experience, by saying a thing, then often as not it came true.
I'm very surprised when people think it's still a fringe issue. More and more people are fortunately waking up to the fact that this planet is our home, and it's our only home, and we need to keep it in good condition.
The decision makers work on the basis of macroeconomics. There is nobody listening who is powerful enough to take radical action to change the way we do global business.
Over that next weekend, the officers came in, met with the members, I believe, and EcoIsland was the new brand and everything became EcoIsland. It's important to sort of point out there, when most people say eco, they think of the environment, but the word eco can also mean economics, and the two things were together. It was every part of the council and the whole island was going to become EcoIsland.
Maybe he did overreach himself because not all of it has come true, but then again maybe he actually did discover something. And maybe he was tapping into something that was here on the island already.
One would have thought that had this been planned and seeing it in a national newspaper and this great big announcement, that organisations on the Isle of Wight, businesses, charities and others would have been consulted and asked, and instead it was just sort of announced.
There was very much the attitude then that those who had come to the transition movement launches were of the opinion, my goodness, this is a possibility, we better do something about it. Then suddenly EcoIsland came along and there was like, oh, that's okay then, the council are going to do it for us, we can stand back and relax.
For once, I actually felt many years of frustration of nobody listening to environmental concerns on the island, that now we had a chief exec that would sit down with us, talk to us about issues, and that the council was going to embrace environmental ideas.
The idea had been that if EcoIsland came to be, we would not only have grassroots up, we would have top level down, and hopefully you meet in the middle and everything's wonderful. And certainly the initial impetus for the EcoIsland movement was very much about speaking to the businesses and the companies who would make changes at upper levels. And the idea was that the transition movement would be making the changes at the lower levels.
I think it's really important to connect with your community and to find small-scale solutions. I think transition has got it pretty right, where, for example, in Totnes, people are growing more fruit trees, nut trees, growing their own. So you can find a lot of solutions locally, but the situation is so dire now, you can't just keep it local.
In February 2008, the Isle of Wight Council's cabinet, having scrambled to find a policy to fit Mr Duckworth's vision, gave its unanimous backing to EcoIsland. On March 26, 2008, a one-day EcoIsland conference attended by the Great and the Green was held here at the Cowes Yacht Haven. It was quite a do. According to the EcoIsland website, this conference welcomed over 250 community leaders from the island to hear from a range of inspirational and internationally famous keynote speakers on how the future of the Isle of Wight would focus on the theme of sustainability.
It was great to see so many organisations there supporting it and individuals.
I think the enthusiasm there, the aspiration of Joe Duckworth was important for that time for the Isle of Wight Council.
And we really felt, I think, everybody there, that we were going to be listened to and that this was something very positive.
So to me, it's not a one-issue thing. It's about looking at the planet and looking at her as our home, treating her with respect, and that means using as little as we can. So energy conservation, in a sense, should come on top, if I'm to prioritise, then to conserve energy, because then we don't need all these, some of them, fake solutions.
I think people understand that our resources are finite here, because we have to get products from the mainland, because we have to get rid of our waste over that strip of water.
But at that particular conference, I then had a chat with Joe Duckworth, who was there, and that's when he told us that he was leaving the island, that he had a new job in London, but he hoped that we would continue with the EcoIsland vision and that it would continue to deliver and all the things that they'd promised on, because obviously he wasn't going to be there.
I think that the initial support for EcoIsland, as far as the council was concerned, was saving face for Joe Duckworth, because he'd been caught on the hop. He'd fired from the hip about that Guardian interview, and suddenly it was a good idea that everyone thought it had to happen. So I think that there was an incentive within the island government to make something happen.
I think if we put any kind of environmental control into the hands of a local government, we are going to be looking at parochial arguments against and for. We're going to be looking at balancing the local government books. anything that is spent that has a long-term sort of projection is politically poisonous because it's not in somebody's term of office. And if we don't break that cycle, we are never going to get out of it.
My concern was with him going that EcoIsland could then be put on the back shelf and maybe less noise made about it.
It's the right thing to do. We know now that we're in trouble, and we should be trying to do as much as we can to make ourselves as self-sufficient as possible with things like power and food production. That's just common sense.
The Isle of Wight Council produced an ambitious document enabling the EcoIsland. This was going to solve just about every problem you could think of. Everyone would be nice to each other, businesses would boom, everything would be lovely. Have a nice day. According to the EcoIsland website, EcoIsland is for everyone who lives, invests, works on or visits the Isle of Wight. Up to 1,500 island homes might be insulated. Sir Terry Farrell, the architect, was appointed as design champion. 4 eco-public toilets would spring up, and plans were made for a yearly green jamboree, the Big Green Picnic.
Well, the Big Green Picnic was the official public launch. It was a good concept because it was in Newport where people could get to. I personally and the Footprint Trust were very pleased to be there and to see something actually happening, albeit that it was just the launch.
EcoIsland was on its way. Nothing could possibly go wrong, except in September 2008, the biggest financial crash since 1929 pushed the world economy into meltdown. There was no more money. Even the Isle of Wight Council realised that the Great Recession would have an effect. The Chief Executive Officer, Joe Duckworth, had left the island earlier that year, and EcoIsland slowly sank out of sight. Mr. Duckworth has not responded to our efforts to contact him.
What actually happens after Joe Duckworth goes is that all the branding stays the same. There is a section of the council website all about EcoIsland with I think a PDF on saying, you know, all the things that they were hoping to do, but nothing really happens. There isn't any initiatives really. It's almost as though it has been put on the shelf and forgotten about. There is no real action as far as anyone can see.
We are absolutely staring down the barrel of a global disaster. That's how serious it is. In the developed world, we will keep staving it off by throwing money at projects to stave it off, but more and more and more, the global pressures of transhumance of people, displaced people, skirmishes, wars, will all be based on the fact that our environment is breaking down.
Back in 2006, the Isle of Wight Council's renewable energy strategy had set a target of 10% of Isle of Wight electricity to be produced from renewables within 4 years. But the exclusion of wind power in the amended options had an unfortunate effect. The targets set were completely unachievable. A planning application to build 5 wind turbines here in the West Wight was turned down by the Isle of Wight Council's planning committee. Although they would have supplied 11% of the island's electricity, the application met with fierce opposition.
What came about because of this first planning application? When subsequent planning applications came along, Thwart was usually asked to help out people in that area, and many people in that area came on board, and subsequently Thwart had a mailing list of 3,000 people all over the Isle of Wight.
Of course, there were objectors to the wind turbines, as there were to other types of renewable energy, and only they will know their reasons for objecting to them. You know, there was a lot of accusations of NIMBYism.
No commercial wind turbines have ever been built here or anywhere else on the island.
Wind is one of the big producers of renewables, proven technology, but you won't see one on the Isle of Wight. You have to go all the way to Reading before you bump into one of those.
I always felt that actually on the island we did need some onshore wind turbines to reflect a pluralistic approach to renewable energy. Now there's other initiatives underway, but I always felt that onshore wind, particularly because the island played a part in the manufacture of the blades and the testing, needed to be here.
Despite the fact that we have a factory here on the Isle of Wight making the largest wind turbine blades in the world and exporting them and employing many people to do so. But they cannot be erected here on the Isle of Wight.
But there was a natural resistance across a number of parties and groups on the council, and also very powerful campaign groups locally to stop these particular proposals going ahead.
I mean, all you can try and do is to give them balanced information, but unfortunately a lot of people don't listen, and people get a belief in their mind, they get a fear in their mind, they don't like change, they don't want things to change, maybe they've bought into the idea of some rural idyll, and they don't want change.
I suppose the current thing is NIMBYism, or you know, you're, at one hand you're trying to sell a green touristy place that hasn't changed since 1950. On the other hand, you're trying to embrace technology.
For some reason, land-based wind turbines have become a political issue right across England, and particularly here on the Isle of Wight. And some issues just become polarised for no apparent reason.
With the economic partnership, I was heavily involved in bringing investors to the island and the development of the business park there. We got huge funding because I was on the advisory board of CEDA, the old development agency. We got a lot of money devoted to the island from Milton Keynes and Brighton through our good officers, only for the Isle of Wight Council not to exploit it, shall we say, properly. We had plans for the whole development of East Cowes, hotel, Red Funnel changing its harbour route. Bits happened, they sold off the Union Jack shed, but nothing much happened. And a lot of the money disappeared. You know, the whole idea was to revamp the Medina Valley, but I'm afraid the local support wasn't there.
Under present political circumstances, there are no subsidies available to land-based wind turbines, so I think it's very unlikely. And also I believe, although I can't be absolutely certain, that there's not sufficient grid capacity for one to be built in the near future.
And we got a lot of funding and a lot of building. We got the technology centre built up there, etc. But when it came to planning, there was so much opposition, the wind farm wasn't allowed.
But it's a kind of a brute fact that if you want to apply to develop onshore wind in the United Kingdom, your application will almost certainly fail right now because of ultimately political decisions. They're not economic decisions, and they're not energy security decisions. They must ultimately be politically motivated.
The opposition is so vociferous and so well organised that it's not been politically possible to put through a successful planning application and carry it through to construction.
Total lack of commitment by the island, and by the island I meant the planners or whoever it is pushing it through, and I think very, very difficult to develop wind if we weren't given the planning permission to do it.
I mean, since I've been in the council, we haven't even considered putting forward an application for the use of wind onshore because we know that the reaction is so intensely hostile.
Since its inception, Thwart has never objected to any applications for wind turbines on factory roofs or schools or small ones on farms. And it has certainly not objected to any other planning applications for any other form of renewable energy, because that is not in its remit to do so.
It's got to be community-led, and community have an investment in it and see the rewards themselves. So, you know, having an external company imposing a wind turbine on you is different to having a community that can see an investment in there and can see how they're going to benefit from that.
Wind power is one of these Marmite things. You either love it or you hate it.
Some countries are getting really serious about it. Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark in particular, they are doing great things. They are moving to a point where more renewable energy is being generated and is being generated by fossil fuel. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't economically viable. And they're looking at economic viability in terms of the environment in which they are living. We are not.
This is a managed environment. Every inch of it, with maybe apart from a few rocks off the needles or something, is managed by people and is created by people over thousands and thousands of years.
So when we look out the windows of the rolling dales or the Sussex Downs or Heathland or the New Forest itself, which is a very good example, it's all entirely artificial.
The whole of the Isle of Wight is like that. It's got we are intimately involved in it. We as humans are part of that landscape. We live here and we form it, we create it.
Humans have sculptured and affected that landscape in some places for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years.
A huge amount of effort has gone into getting it into that state.
Humans have absolutely decimated biodiversity. We produced one of the great mass extinction events in all of life's history. You'd have to go back about 65 million years to find extinction rates as they currently are, and they were caused by massive meteorites smashing into the earth and making the dinosaurs go extinct.
We have to look at everything. It's all interconnected, it's all about balance and harmony, and Homo sapiens is absolutely destroying it.
We've been disastrous in terms of biodiversity. We've fundamentally altered it in many different ways. It seems inconsistent perhaps to then object to something like a wind turbine or other forms of renewable energies on the basis that it's not natural.
In 2009, the American political scientist Elinor Ostrom won a Nobel Prize in economics.
She got her Nobel Prize for showing how local communities sustainably manage their what we call common pool resources, things like fisheries or could be commons for grazing. She was pushing back against a more kind of classical Western economic doctrine that if you want to manage anything, you've got to privatise it.
The capitalists, the bankers, the money makers have got to really begin to understand that their superficial jobs cease the minute that there are no more cans of food, there are no more fish, there isn't anything in the supermarket, and their caviar lunches go out the window. They have got to start to realise that they're as much at risk as somebody who's on a minimum wage.
When you look at the potential of a misfortune, the potential for harm, the potential for disruption, how significant the disruptions could be, the dislocations, economic, social, political.
I believe that we are going to see absolutely unparalleled unrest, and it's because we are not taking the environment seriously.
It's the recent El Niño phenomenon, this large pulse of heat that's brought us already very near, even temporarily, to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And you can already look at some of the disruption that's producing. So if by the middle of the century you're looking at 1.5 or even 2 degrees, you're going to be looking at continual crop failures in some parts of the world.
But we are in a situation that very, very shortly is going to be irretrievable. We're going to watch the fairly rapid extinction of us as a species.
The last 20 years, the United Nations have been demonstrating, and other kind of regional international agreements have been demonstrating that we don't seem to have the coordinated international response.
I think we are going headlong towards an Armageddon, which is our own making. However, I think there is enlightenment there. I think there are people who are speaking out.
There's much more optimistic research and actual development in which local communities, sometimes at a village or even a street level, take ownership for their respective impacts on what could be a global commons. And then with agreeing with other streets or communities or cities, they kind of scaffold up those agreements. So it's a much more of a bottom-up approach rather than waiting for the international community to get their ideas together.
I think we've had too many false starts. We now need to have some plan which can be followed through and doesn't depend on government policy from day to day and has the population behind it. I think there is scope for that, but it needs somebody locally with support from central government who can see that through.
The island should be an ideal test bed for things, whether it be retail, manufacturing, eco politics, whatever, the geographical boundary making it in effect a small country is perfect, in my opinion.
But in 2009, Vestas, the largest producer of wind turbine blades in the UK, closed this factory behind me, making 425 of its workforce redundant. As this was happening, an alternative green agenda was being explored. Meetings were being held by Green Tank, a forum for green ideas, in this hotel, the Wood Vale in Gurnard. These meetings were hosted by David Green, the owner of an island PR company who'd invested heavily in the green agenda. His home nearby had become a show house for green technology, and he brought an at times messianic fervour to the idea of the Isle of Wight becoming a testbed for new green technologies.
We did his house for him. Okay, we put in an air source heat pump, wall heating, the whole caboodle, solar PV, etc., etc. I knew of him before when he was at the sailing place, UKSA, okay, and we'd worked together. I was then running the economic partnership, and we put quite a lot of money into Gypsy Moth 2 from the economic partnership there and then. So we all knew each other.
At the Green Tank meeting held on June the 12th, 2009, Jim Fawcett, the Isle of Wight Council's principal environmental officer, presented what was left of the EcoIsland plan. It was, he said, the most ambitious strategy in the UK in terms of sustainable development, and a real opportunity to create regeneration. He was optimistic, he said, but we needed to harness everything we could on the island to make it happen. In October 2009, the Isle of Wight Council reported that the carbon footprint on the island had actually increased. But there was some light on the horizon. In the village of Chale on the southwest coast of the island, Malcolm Groves, a local parish councillor and also chairman of the Southern Housing Group, was spearheading the Chale Green project. Alongside him was David Green.
David Green saw that the Department of Energy and Climate Change were advertising for projects, and they were going to put up large amounts in our terms, £100,000, and for projects that were community focused. The partners were Chale Parish Council, South Wight Housing Association, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and DEC. David Green was recruited to lead the project operationally. David worked very, very hard to get the project put together. I think he had the background idea that he could do something out here, and so I think he may well have spoken to people out here beforehand.
The Chale project was, which we put in a bid, it's not sour grapes, but instead of going to an island company, which it needed to generate funds, and he could have taken a levy on it, they put it to a company called EGA, who brought teams from Wales to do the whole Chale project. So the island didn't benefit at all, which was a great shame.
You have to bear in mind the situation they were in was they could not afford to heat their homes. So you'd have a family essentially living in one room in a 2 or 3 bedroom house because the rest of it was too cold to live in.
Buoyed up by this success, in 2011, David Green decided to revive the EcoIsland strategy.
He was aware of EcoIsland, he'd heard about it, he had a little bit to do with in the early days, and he quite rightly could see that nothing was happening. And he then gave, I think, the council a wonderful opportunity in their eyes where they could hand EcoIsland over to him and all the things he was promising, and it could be delivered without any real input from them. I think being given that in a time where austerity was being talked about and cuts, the council thought, great, we can't have to worry about EcoIsland now. This fella with all his marketing background and he's very confident in what he says, very believable, and they just bit his hand off, I think, and said, yeah, go ahead and do it.
David Green took it up, and because of his own personal sheer enthusiasm, made it happen. And there was a period of a couple of years when everyone believed the same thing, that all this sustainability stuff could be done.
A fascinating, charismatic man. He was, full of ideas. Once he was on a roll, that was, you'd struggle to put the off switch on. But he was a great guy, and I always got on very well with him.
Given the challenges we were facing as a council, we were quite relaxed and in fact supportive of the fact that David picked up the mantle on this. We were keen that rather than it being seen as a council initiative, it was led by what was the voluntary sector, and then looking to the private sector. So in many ways that was great, and there's no doubt that whatever the rights and wrongs of how that emerged, the fact is it did manage to join some external funding, did manage to join funding from government to fund particular projects. So actually, in overall terms, we felt that worked well, and it complemented what the council was trying to do.
That was, in a sense, a bit of hope, I think, because many other people, including myself, thought, well, great, this chap's coming along, I know his background, he does achieve stuff.
Every time you spoke to him, there was something new, something different. We could do this, we could do that, this could come into the equation. And it was a big, exciting pool of ideas.
Quite frankly, David had taken up the initiative, he was keen to take it forward, and who were we to stop him?
He had, after all, on board big companies, and he had big, grand ideas.
He had some big names on board, remember, in the early days of, Mitsubishi, IBM, people like that were getting involved, So you felt like there was mileage in this.
And for some, it perhaps was a bit too global and too corporate. I had my thoughts about that as well, but having said that, he got things going.
He planned, astonishingly, to make the island carbon neutral and self-sufficient in energy by 2020. An action group was formed. The great and the good were mobilised. His message was the island is taking some of its destiny back into its own hands. Plans were drawn up to make EcoIsland a community interest company, more commonly known as a CIC. This is a special kind of business which benefits the community rather than private shareholders. David Green was to become the chief executive of EcoIsland CIC. Richard Benyon, Government Minister for the Natural Environment and Fisheries, said, "The EcoIsland is a very impressive and bold ambition, which is being followed closely by the government."
We formed the community interest company. Out of that, we then raised some 70 partners, including some big names you might recognise, including IBM and the likes of Cayman Wireless and Silver Spring Networks. And they then helped us to get that initial seed funding together to get us underway.
The problem was, however, that no one appeared to have any oversight of EcoIsland CIC. But David Green was confident that great things could be achieved. He said, "Free from the constraints of local government and with the scale of funding that is on offer, it is entirely possible that we can reach our goal." The island's then MP, Andrew Turner, speaking in a debate at Westminster Hall, called upon the Department of Energy and Climate Change, DEC, to support EcoIsland. The Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, Chris Hoon, MP, who had visited the island in May, stated in Parliament that he applauded the initiative, which was showing real leadership in bringing the local community and businesses together. The island's weekly newspaper, the Isle of Wight County Press, had come out strongly in favour of EcoIsland.
David came to see me to ask, sort of County Press support in the endeavours he was planning to get underway, and we hit it off very well. I got a very green way of thinking myself, so his thoughts and ideas were exciting to me. Signed the County Press up as a supporter of EcoIsland, and we didn't give financial help, but we gave publicity and became a media partner of the venture in a loose term.
They published a 30-page EcoIsland supplement saying that they were proud to be partners of the group of individuals and companies who are striving to make a difference to our lives, our society and our prosperity. EcoIsland now had the backing of the local MP, the local authority and the local Chamber of Commerce. We asked all three to participate in this film. Only Andrew Turner MP agreed.
He could make people believe him. I think the council, or for that matter the Chamber of Commerce, are saying things which there isn't depth of understanding. I found him a brilliant. He was more than a brilliant salesman, but he was a brilliant salesman. Yeah, yeah.
He was a wonderful marketing guy, but he didn't have the funds really to have a team behind him of dedicated professionals who were delivering projects, and delivering projects is really the only way to make it happen, be taken seriously.
I think the proposal, it was a real job trying to make it work together with other parts of the government, whereas the previous thing tended to have a we're clever, we do this, and they go on doing this and nobody takes any notice.
Well, I think the thing you've got to realise is this is a very challenging piece of work generally. It's not easy to fix this energy wheel. It's broken badly.
Everyone pays lip service to the idea of sustainability, but no one actually knows how to achieve it. And we're not prepared to take the risk of investing in things that are now working because we think there might be something better coming along in 5 years' time. Well, that's not the answer. The thing is to do now what works now.
There's a massive energy shortage coming down the tracks to us. Nearly a third of the total generation capacity comes offline in 2 years' time. So there's a big black energy hole.
In early October 2011, David Green announced a £25 million solar energy plan that would slash energy bills. He claimed crucially that private equity investment had already been secured and that he'd discussed this project with the Treasury.
In November, a reception was held at the Terrace Room in the House of Commons. The island would, with the backing of partners such as IBM and Toshiba, become a living laboratory, pioneering the use of smart grid technology.
So what we're doing is we're trying to generate from tidal, from wind, from solar PV, energy from waste, and even geothermal. We have hot rocks 2 kilometres down. We're using that as heat and using that to drive steam turbines. So we've got a lot of plans to integrate a whole range of technologies to make it work.
David Green, speaking at the Commons reception, said, "There has never been a time in humanity's history when the light of hope has needed to burn more brightly."
Back on the Isle of Wight, the project was becoming known locally as EcoIsland.
What became apparent was that EcoIsland was a website and that businesses like IBM and others paid money or gave help in kind to get their logo on it.
In February 2012, EcoIsland moved into a self-styled eco-hub at this business park in Newport.
The amount of money we don't know, but we know one company paid $5,000, another paid $15,000, and many of them probably questioned a year or so later just why they were asked for this money and what has the money achieved, because all it seemed to achieve was more admin people in EcoIsland Towers, the hub with the electric car outside, which at the end of the day was an office with a lovely desk made of lovely old wood and a few signs and an electrically charged vehicle outside. There was nothing there that you would go in and go, wow, I've learned all about EcoIsland, because it really wasn't much to show. So the website was it, really.
He was a very inspiring man, and he really wanted the council on board. I noticed that from start.
We made very clear throughout that actually the EcoIsland has been led by him, was not being done, on our behalf. It was an initiative which he was taking forward.
And that was one of the issues, of course, that the council wasn't really there. I would have liked to see more cooperation.
When money was being secured from the government to fund EcoIsland projects, we were the financially accountable body for that, and we obviously wanted to make sure that was being done properly.
There's no real monitoring or control of this project. One man running everything with no support and help. Now, in the early days, he surrounded himself with people who gave him guidance and advice. There was an advisory group.
I mean, we asked for regular monthly accounts, but they never happened. We asked for, what real projects are there. Let's get in there and get bidding for these projects, get island companies. And there were quite a few island companies around that could have done, a lot of the stuff, but never happened. David
became more isolated and didn't want to listen to anybody who disagreed with him. He would say, "You're being negative. This is what we must do." So it was almost like a Stalinist approach to environmentalism. This is the true way.
He wouldn't listen or couldn't listen or whatever. He had good ideas, but he needed a proper board that he listened to, that he was accountable to. He was accountable to nobody, in reality.
And gradually people who'd been involved at the beginning started to fall back and not be involved. And he became more and more isolated.
Warning bells were ringing. I think he took more and more staff on who weren't paid, who eventually pulled the plug.
And the council, again, having handed it all over to him and to his CIC, weren't there to support and help him. And if ever there was a lesson learned here, it's about never let one person run a whole project without any monitoring, without any control.
An international conference planned for April to celebrate the work of EcoIsland was quietly dropped. Another one was announced, and this one did take place. This time, a global summit would be addressed by Minister of State for Energy, John Hayes, and delegates from over 20 islands worldwide would be invited to sign the EcoIsland Accord.
Over 2 days, corporate sponsors IBM and Cable & Wireless demonstrated smart grids and renewable technologies in what was now being promoted as a £300 million project. Quite where that money was coming from was not apparent.
One thing I didn't think David did was concentrate enough on getting a couple of things off the ground that showed this meant business. If we'd have started seeing some battery stations or some network of recharging points and things coming to the island, that in those early days people might have started to believe more in it, but it was a scattergun approach.
In the meantime, the Isle of Wight Council was making an application to the Green Deal Fund. This was administered by the Department of the Environment and Climate Change for a grant of just over £500,000. The grant would be used to fund projects to reduce energy bills on the Isle of Wight. And half of it, £250,000, would be handed over to EcoIsland. But EcoIsland was a community interest company with only one director and a credit rating of just 15 out of 100, which prompted company data provider CreditSafe to issue a warning notice: credit at your discretion. The crucial question was, did the Isle of Wight Council know about that warning notice? And if they didn't know, why didn't they know?
I was rather surprised to find out about the poor credit rating of EcoIsland CIC.
When you are dealing with community interest companies and that type of setup, there is less of an obligation from all parties, be that the government, be that local authorities, to undertake the level of due diligence that you would do in relation to the private sector.
Because you don't want to give money to an organisation that may go bust and then you won't get your project delivered.
We always had some concerns about the setup and how sustainable their operating model was.
And one would hope that the local authority would have picked up on that and then question whether or not that they were a good partner to actually deliver.
They were an organisation that was difficult to be seen to be criticising. Not that we necessarily did want to criticise them, but what I'm saying is they had that kind of favourable glow about them.
That favourable glow was conveniently reflected in the Green Deal application being successful. And the project was launched here at the Isle of Wight College in February 2013.
But I was at the launch of the Green Deal by EcoIsland, and I remember David Green, as always, in his characteristic fashion, was very enthusiastic about this. So whether he believed in exactly the way it was done, I'm not sure, but he tried very hard to get this through, as he tried with everything else. He was a relentless worker.
Green Deal was about a whole raft of measures you could do for your home. So you could take out a loan for insulation. People put solar panels on their roof, for instance. Major banks and building societies were actually lending money cheaper. The Green Deal really was poorly thought through and really didn't achieve a great deal.
Later that month, the Isle of Wight County Press carried an interview with David Green, in which he defended his £61,000 a year salary, saying, "It's hard to put a value on the amount of blood, sweat and tears people have put into this. The personal commitment from staff and others who have worked unpaid.
We can lower the amount of energy that's used in the home by about 70%. You imagine what that would do to your energy bills."
In the May local council elections, the Conservatives lost control of the Isle of Wight Council and were replaced by an independent administration. Councillor Ian Stevens became leader of the council, and newly elected councillor Louisa Hillard, the cabinet member for sustainability.
Because obviously we actually supported EcoIsland as an administration. We thought the aspirations that they had were very important. Although obviously there were some problems with the delivery of that.
On June the 6th, in one final throw of the dice, the EcoIsland Energy Service Company, ESCO, was launched at yet another House of Commons reception. The plan was to fit energy management systems across 50,000 homes and businesses on the island in partnership with Swedish telecoms company Maingate. David Green said, "We are going to be able to put together a totally integrated technology solution which will guarantee success."
The model that we've got shows that not only after the first couple of years do you start to see a return, but we have the model that will show how we can own our total generation capacity within 10 years and be putting money back into the community in terms of projects as we go.
By September, EcoIsland was in serious trouble. David Green's family were becoming concerned about him. A normally gregarious character, he'd become quieter than normal. All his family savings had been invested in EcoIsland. There were still some funding streams available to him. But on the 19th of September, the family home was valued by estate agents.
David had been acting irrationally for, I think, a good 9 months. He'd stopped listening to people, anyone who dared disagree with him or say anything that wasn't according to his script. A lot of people that had been involved had distanced themselves, and businesses as well that were involved in organisations were now asking for their logos to be removed, and people were removing EcoIsland from their websites as well and not mentioning it because it was seen as something now that was a one-man band who wasn't listening to anyone.
On October the 1st, the EcoIsland Community Interest Company was put into voluntary liquidation with debts of over £400,000.
Obviously it was a big shock to all of us when we heard David say that EcoIsland was having to go bust.
On Wednesday the 2nd of October, John Metcalfe, the Isle of Wight Council's Deputy Managing Director, met with the police to establish if there was a crime to be investigated. An allegation had been received from the council that £115,000 of public money had been fraudulently obtained by the EcoIsland company, and specifically David Green. On that same day, a press release was issued, authorised by Stuart Love, the council's Strategic Director of Environment and Economy. It's spoken by an actor.
The EcoIsland Partnership Community Interest Company was set up by David Green independently from the council. The council commissioned the EcoIsland Community Interest Company to deliver the government's Green Deal on the island using £240,000 of funding from the Department of Energy and Climate Change. Having reviewed delivery of this project, it would appear that approximately £115,000 of the £240,000 is unaccounted for, and we have therefore referred this matter to the police to investigate.
The information presented to the police included a spreadsheet, which the council claimed showed false accounting.
Well, certainly there had been rumours that people hadn't been paid. I knew people who hadn't been paid by EcoIsland COC for work that they'd carried out. And so that, I wouldn't say was common knowledge.
I think the council had serious concerns. They made that information available to the police. I think, and I say this from a distance, not being involved, and these are decisions made by my successors, but I think actually their actions were probably justified.
We should have people in the council who are capable of reading a spreadsheet properly, and if they're not certain about anything, they should be capable of asking, in this case David, what was wrong and why. There's no reason why he shouldn't have been asked for clarification. I think David was open about everything. It was him who first said there was a problem. He provided the figures.
Everybody in accounting makes mistakes occasionally. Local authorities do, businesses do. So the normal thing to do, what I would thought, would be to question it and say, are you sure these figures are correct? Because we've heard from people who haven't been paid.
There was never any suggestion that he was concealing anything, and I don't know what the council was relying on to allege criminal behaviour by David, any sort of fraud or dishonesty.
I think this was an issue of significant public interest, and there were some significant public interest and taxpayer interest in what was happening to that money, and the council were right to bring it to wider attention.
I think the way that was handled could have been done a lot better, really. But also, it's a bit late in the day because there were alarm bells a lot sooner that it wasn't delivering, that there were problems with the CIC, and the council probably should have acted sooner rather than just calling in the police when things had gone very wrong.
I mean, you're sharing things with me which actually I didn't know the detail of. So, I mean, this was stuff that was obviously overseen principally by our officers, and of course I think we're now talking just 4 months prior to my departure as leader. So, and of course I was aware following my departure of leader that events came to a head, and I was aware that the council took steps to refer some of their concerns to a third party.
Well, when you say to a third party, how do you mean?
Well, the police.
The situation was rapidly becoming more complex. On Tuesday, EcoIsland had gone into voluntary liquidation. On Wednesday, an allegation of fraud had been made against David Green. And on Thursday, the police discovered that a council press release had been put out the previous day, detailing their involvement. Although John Metcalfe claimed to the police to have no knowledge of this disclosure, there was an identified risk of evidence potentially being either lost or destroyed. On Thursday afternoon, David Green was arrested on suspicion of fraud by false representation. He was interviewed and released later that evening. The following day, the Isle of Wight County Press led their front page with the EcoIsland story.
It hurt to put it on the front page because, you know, you feel like, you know, this is somebody I really sort of admire, and, you know, I don't want to, but, you know, your news instinct does take over, yes. You know, you can't, you know, once you start hiding things away or not putting them in the paper because, you know, it's a friend of yours or somebody you know, then you know, your days as a newspaper editor should be numbered. It's not right, and I'd never do that. So yes, you have to do it.
This is David's be-all and end-all. This is what he's put everything into, and I'm sure that if there's money missing, it would not be because he's taken it for himself, anything like that. So really careful, because this is going to hurt him.
No, I mean, I don't. The council will themselves have to explain why that information was released to the press. There may have been some wider issue there about questions being asked by the media that merited a response.
The way that the council handled it was quite unusual. I would go no stronger than that, but quite unusual.
Well, to do that to someone like David, who had really put this forward as his life project. And of course image is important in that. And of course image was important to David, as it is to most of us, but perhaps more to him than some.
To go out slightly on a limb on this, I mean, on this whole issue of the money wasn't ring-fenced and it could be used to service the company's debts, I don't buy that argument.
Whatever happened, it seems to me that some people who were being paid a lot of our money are responsible for not dealing with this better than they did.
I think he was fundamentally honest. He would never set out to mislead. He might want to put a spin on things, that was his job, but he wouldn't want to do anything which he felt would eventually come back and bite him on the ankles.
The fact is that that was very much against the spirit, if not the letter, of what that funding was provided for. That funding was provided for a particular projects of which it was allocated, and that was the basis on which the funding was secured. That money should not have been used to serve the wider debts of the company, and I have to say I was surprised that the police took a relatively relaxed view about that.
The decision to take that forward, to notify the police, was taken by a strategic director at the time who'd actually put forward the situation with regard to funding.
And who was that?
That was Stuart Love. So that was a decision made by Stuart Love. Because I'm very much made of softer things, is to turn around and when someone's world caves in, hold on, I'm a counsellor with a little bit of heart.
I think the difficulty Stuart may have faced, and again I say this from a distance, is he may have struggled to get straightforward answers out of David Green if asking those questions, and he probably felt that it was such a serious matter that it merited being looked at properly by the authorities in the first instance.
Our economy director at the time has since left the council.
And who was that?
Stuart Love. And he said it was best we didn't get involved, that obviously officers would sort it out. So it was not something that I was involved in. So I don't really know what happened. I know obviously there has been some media interest, but you know, it wasn't something that I wanted to get involved with anyway.
You know, and Stuart was a pragmatic guy, you know, who you know will do things by the book, and you know he hasn't got where he is in local government without knowing what's right and what's wrong legally. So he's not going to sort of give him enough slack to carry on when there's something he's not very happy with, and that was I suppose towards the end of the days when nothing was happening, and nobody was reining David in.
After David had said that EcoIsland was in trouble financially, the council seemed to have looked at things carelessly. Whether they were mistaken or malicious, I don't know.
So I could feel that this was not going the right way. And I noticed when I texted him, and he texted me back, that he's taken this really hard. I mean, he said the bus has gone, and my heart is broken.
On Monday, the 7th of October, 2013, David Green took his own life at his home on the Isle of Wight. He was 52.
I just couldn't believe it. I mean, this was a larger-than-life man who, despite all his weaknesses, he had vast strengths, and there was never any question in my head that what he was trying to do was heartfelt and the right thing for the island. I never had any doubt about that.
I was in Croatia on holiday, and I just got a message through on my phone, and I was sitting in a cafe in Dubrovnik, and I was just absolutely gutted to know, to find this out. And obviously, you know the two things aren't unconnected, so it was just an awful moment to discover that.
And I just think if he'd had more support from the council and if they had looked into this more carefully, because he was innocent.
For a man who was very proud, a man that had achieved a great deal in his life, you know, he came from quite a humble background.
Who are we dealing with here? I mean, if it was some crook that we knew had a criminal record and had done lots of bad things, you might be dealing a bit harsher, but in this case it wasn't. It was David Green. It was a man who had done lots of good for this island.
A great marketeer, a great publicist, but unfortunately in this project it had all got too much for him.
Yes, of course he made mistakes. We all do. But you don't deserve to lose your life for that.
And lack of help and lack of support and just being left to sail his own ship without anyone helping him, partly due to him because he had distanced himself, but also the Isle of Wight Council. Why did you just hand your project over to one person without any monitoring or any help?
We need to build on the legacy that David Green built and not just hide him away like something shameful. Because the shame is on us, not on him.
I didn't, and I don't agree with that. Trial by the media is not the best thing, especially when someone's left on their own. With regard to a CIC with one director, to me, sorry, that's not the way to do things. And if you look at the way that EcoIsland was put forward, it was put forward. And agreed with officers. It wasn't something that I don't think the membership even under David Pewitt was involved with, or Andy Sutton. I think that, you know, looking at it, I think that it was set up elsewhere, and I think the majority of the dialogue was done officers and the CIC and whoever was involved with that.
In March 2014, at the inquest into his death, the coroner, Caroline Summery, directly addressed the Isle of Wight Council. She expressed her extreme concern that information had apparently been leaked. Her words are spoken by an actor.
I trust there will be a full investigation and appropriate action taken against whoever has issued this information, either by way of a leak, in particular if it's by way of a leak, or if the information was issued prematurely.
Detective Constable Lee of Hampshire Police stated at the inquest,
"Our problem was, when it was reported in the media the following day, we had reasonable grounds to suspect that an offence had been committed, and we needed to act relatively quickly in order to secure and present the evidence."
But what was said later was that a spreadsheet was misinterpreted by the council.
In a statement read out by the coroner at David Green's inquest, Detective Inspector Tutton of Hampshire Constabulary stated that on Wednesday, the 23rd of October 2013, 16 days after David Green's death, a meeting was held at County Hall between himself and Jim Fawcett from the Isle of Wight Council. He said,
Mr. Fawcett was the council's project liaison in relation to the deck money and was the person responsible for overseeing the project on behalf of the council as the authorising body. In this meeting, Mr. Fawcett confirmed that the initial report to the police relating to the spreadsheets being submitted in order to get payments was incorrect.
The coroner also stated in her summing up that David Green
was a decent man who had some financial problems, but there's nothing to suggest that he behaved dishonestly. And this inquest has one focus in law, but I hope that it goes some way to restoring his good name.
and the investigation requested by the coroner?
I don't recall there being a full investigation. If there was, then it was undertaken away from the membership.
But Councillor Stevens, you were the leader
Absolutely.
of the council, and you don't to this day know if that happened?
I can't be sure that did happen. I've got nothing to hide with regard to this, and you know, as I say, it was dealt with at officer level, as it would be, you know, one would have assumed that once that was dealt with, and we have a monitoring officer and indeed a chief executive and at the time strategic director who was dealing with it.
But why was it necessary to issue that press release on the very day that David Green was reported to the police? Once the accusation became public, then, as the police have said, his arrest was inevitable. A Freedom of Information request to the Isle of Wight Council drew the following response.
Following the coroner's inquest, the council undertook a review. This was carried out by Davina Fior, Head of Corporate Governance and Monitoring Officer, and found that no council officer had acted inappropriately. With respect to the police investigation, the council passed information to the police that was relevant to the matter.
They may well have felt that information to be relevant, but in fact it was irrelevant, because by their own admission it was incorrect. That review is obviously not the full investigation expected by the coroner, and until it's released, we'll probably never know what really went on in this building behind me.
Mr. Love has not responded to our efforts to contact him.
David Green was certainly egotistical. He was over-optimistic, and at times he was difficult to work with. But he was not a crook. He'd been arrested and charged on suspicion of fraud by false representation. He felt publicly humiliated in the media, who'd been fed premature and incorrect information by the Isle of Wight Council. And the future? Well, the Isle of Wight Council held yet another environmental conference earlier this year. We asked to film there, but were denied permission. Strange that.